freelance for a lot of events. That is the event world when you're first getting into it.
Yeah.
So I was actually producing events for some very large bar crawl companies. And one of the things that I saw within this space is that it was very white. And when people of color came into the space, it was just made uncomfortable for them. And then a few years ago, when you would talk to people about what a bar crawl was, they wouldn't know what it is, how you do it, so forth. So myself and my two other best friends that are currently in DC, we got together and we wanted to put something together that was for Black people. We find joy in gathering and doing things together, like you mentioned. So we started that in 2017. Our first bar crawl was in Brooklyn, New York. Um, Businesses registered in DC. We went to LA, Atlanta, a bunch of other places, Portland, Oregon, which is pretty weird, but it was a great crawl. It's really just getting people together to enjoy the outdoors, getting people up and out together. Um, and because of COVID-19, of course, we're not operating now, but we are finding ways to kind of amplify Black-owned businesses at this time. And we'll be working towards that throughout the rest of the year. But again, we find joy in gathering in ourselves. So it was very important for us to kind of continue this.
All right, cool. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. Also, if you can put the link, perhaps, if you have any way to collaborate in the chat, that would be great as well.
Sure.
So good stuff. So I'm going to jump to Nicole. Nicole and I are also on a sort of an unofficial task force to really think about how to network in New York City to provide more equity and opportunities. So Nicole, maybe just tell me a little about yourself and just like, how would you start that love letter to your younger self to prepare yourself for what we're going through today?
Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Thank you to CUNY BMI for inviting me. So I work for Department of Education in the Office of Equity and Access. My work is really primarily around youth development with a special interest in young men of color. My work in the past has always been around that, creating programs and running programs for young men of color. Recently, because of COVID, I started a speaker series for young men where it was really about looking at and focusing on the social emotional well-being for our young men in this climate. So what would it look like if we could have a space where young men could have a space where they could come and share and talk and listen to people men of color who are successful in their own right and can pour some wisdom and some knowledge into these young brothers who are at home just being virtual all day. So I've been able to do that for the past since April. And we have a couple of speakers coming up, but I'm really super excited that our next speaker on July 22nd will be Dr. Cornell West. He's visiting a young man. So please, I'm going to send the link to everyone. At 5 minutes before this meeting started, just got the flyer. So I'm really excited to be able to have Dr. West in this space for these young men. So we usually have over 100 plus young men just come in and listen to the speakers. We've had Bakari Sellers, Brian Favors, the Nate Parker Foundation, and we continue to build out, just really creating a safe space for our young men to just come and to be able to speak and to listen. And it's co-hosted by our young men also. So that's really been kind of my pet passion project, but that I really love doing and really just love engaging with our young people, particularly our young men of color. And my letter to my younger self, there'd be a lot. So I think for me in this space, when it comes to, how to handle injustices towards Black people, I was raised in the Caribbean. I went to high school there. I came here for college. So my experience with race was a little different in growing up in the islands versus, I'm from Barbados, growing up in Barbados versus coming here and then kind of having a real culture shock and recognizing for the first time that I am Black. And that was a thing. Like before home, I was a girl, then Black. Here, when I came to America, I was Black first, and then everything else came into play. So that was really a culture shock for me. But I think that some of the tips, if I could go back to tell my young self, would be, don't be afraid to step in and to step up. I know that culturally, we were taught as children to be seen and not heard. That echoed through my household. So students were silenced, right? Know your place, you're a child. And that I carried that with me. And I think that looking back, I would tell her not to be afraid to step in, not to be afraid to use her voice, that her voice matters, that what she has to say is meaningful. Um, and not looking back, I was really falling into and being confined by like white constructs. So the Caribbean, my education was really steeped in British education. So I was really, my voice was coming from that. My vision was from that lens. So there was a lot of unlearning that I had to do in order to relearn. So to my younger self, it would be patient, be kind, allow grace and humanity. Don't be so hard on yourself. And more important, like I said, your voice matters. I wish someone back then said, your voice matters. What you have to say is impactful no matter what it is. And for me, when I work with young people, that is one thing that I constantly try to message to them, that their voice matters, no matter if you're 16 years old, no matter where you live, no matter what shade you are, no matter what gender, ethnicity, you have something to say and it's okay to say it.
That's powerful. I mean, I don't know how old you all are on this. I think Samantha's the only one that said her age, but I just think about, like, I'm 42, about to be 43, and I'm thinking about just the era that we grew up in versus the era now, where young people feel more empowered to speak up and speak out, right? And how much change it's causing in a way that's more rapid than, in some ways, than our last generation. But obviously, the changes that we're going through it's kind of more like trying to open a pickle jar, where maybe the last generation might have been squeezing and then nothing happened, but this generation is just like flying through the jars, like one after another. And so it's really fun to watch that happen without that fear that we grew up with in our generation of saying, well, if I say too much or if I speak out. And so as maybe one of our elder statesmen of this panel, Hollis, you being here, and it's so great to have you here and your perspective. And I know, Hollis, you've been very active in New York City for many years in different capacities, and an activist for many years as well. I think about two things. I think about the age that we have in terms of like the way we respond to social injustices and how our eras have dictated our response. And then secondly, even like the weaponization of the English language and British education on all of our social systems, right? And so in some ways, English has been weaponized for hundreds, almost thousands of years to make it become such a standard that if you don't speak English and speak it a certain way, your ideas aren't considered as viable or as palatable or as prioritized as they should be, right? So I find myself in these spaces where I'm interacting with leaders, and if they're white leaders, there's a certain way and certain speech and certain thing that we sort of adapt, and almost like a code switching that comes along with it as well, that sometimes can keep us. So Hollis, based on what you've gone through as an activist for so many years, your background, what would be the letter you tell yourself? It seems like you kind of had the activist thing going for a long time. How would you start that letter out?
Well, so generally speaking, I would say I was introduced to speak recently at an advertising agency, because my background is in advertising, and I used to be the creative director at the Verve Music Group for several years and vice president. So the white person who introduced me said, "I'd like you to meet Hollis King. He's the guy that shakes the room up."
Mm.
And so I've always been one to challenge whatever is in front of me. And one of the things I have learned along the
So
against all that comes to you from the other world is excellence. Your ability to be excellent will spare you and give you some space to speak in a way that gets you things that you normally won't get. So I think excellence is one of the keys I found in corporate. So it resulted in me winning a lot of awards and nominated for several Grammys. And I would constantly be shaking things up. So, for example, at a record label, there are white artists and black artists. my responsibility as a leader there is to make sure I provide the Black artists with the same amenities and do my best for them as well. Because I figure if I'm in the room and nothing changes as a leader, then I have a problem. I should not be there. So where I have a voice and I could lend a voice and I could make a change, I feel that is part of my moral responsibility to move things forward. So I would say arm yourself with excellence wherever you go and be able to use that as barter
Yeah.
and be that and always stand in the truth that you are here for. There's no point to me being somewhere and not being able to make a change when I see something is wrong or speak up for someone. And also, I would say mentor and train and put out more people to stand in the wind and to stand firmly for what you believe in. You know, I just got a request to do an article a few weeks ago for the 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 Addy Awards, which is the advertising awards, and I looked at it, and everybody who was writing these articles on the best album covers were white, and I thought, well, what's my angle to write this? And I decided to look at it from a design aesthetic, but also from a political lens. And I go from the 50s throughout, and I talk about the design, and I also talk about the political atmosphere where Black artists had to work. And all of these records were designed by people that were not Black. What does it mean for you when your image is controlled by somebody that does not look like you? It's a heavy thing. You know, the recording is not done by you. The imagery is not done by you. And what does that mean today as we look at all this change? So that's the angle I took. And I said, oh boy, maybe they won't like it, you know?
Yeah.
But I decided to stand there in my truth. And I got a call 15 minutes later. And they loved it because it was my truth and it was honest. And it was a thing they would not have thought of. So I would say to my younger self, stand in your truth, live with it, and move forward. It may seem scary, your voice may get shaky, but one day your voice will not shake anymore. Stand in your truth. That's one of the first lessons I would give.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. Thank you so much, Hollis. That's really important to stand. It's actually interesting because everyone kind of said a different iteration of standing or stepping up, right? I'm kind of curious. And I'm going to go back to Sam, not to pick on you, but I think you might be the youngest in this group, and I'm kind of curious, like when I think about standing up and standing out, that comes with a price, right? That comes with a price because a lot of times Black and brown people have the dual responsibility of both doing their jobs and then also being like the social justice person for their organization or being the voice for their community who has to stand up and point out to people who are privileged where they've fallen short, as if they can't educate themselves, right? And so sometimes we take on dual responsibilities, and that sort of comes with the cost of maybe sometimes mental or physical health. And so my second question to kind of kick it off for you, Sam, is just like, given that mental and physical health are really important aspects of not only how we survive this era that we're in, but also come out with a future and a plan that's really specific for the equity for Black and brown folks and for all marginalized communities, especially LGBTQ plus communities. What strategies would you employ or encourage as you're doing this incredible work of also standing out and standing up? What would you also do to make sure that you're coming out healthy and surviving? And I'll just kind of wrap that up by saying that, COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting Black and brown communities and those with underlying conditions. And a lot of times it's an entire pipeline that gets to that point, right? We're in underserved communities, which means we have less healthcare options, which means we have worse food options, more food deserts, which means we have worse health, which means that we have the more disproportionate effects of COVID-19 because of our housing, our food, our healthcare. So given the physical and mental health importance of this era for us going forward to survive this crisis and also move into a place of equity, what strategies do you employ and what do you encourage your people around you to do?
Yeah, for sure. I think personally, I am very proud of the Gen Z millennial generation right now. But also, we just literally hosted the Human Rights Conference with NYC Pride, where we centered a panel that was specifically geared towards Gen Z and millennial individuals to talk about what this space was, because we've never been through a pandemic. We've never been through a uprising like this. So we constantly have to kind of go through, should I be protesting? Is it safe to protest? COVID-19 is still a thing.
Yeah.
Also learning why I'm protesting and learning why it's important to vote this year and learning why it's important to participate in the census. So for the younger generation, it's a bit of a balance between being this activist and having all of this on our shoulders, and also taking time for ourselves to just have self-care. One of my like daily mantras now is Black joy is an act of resistance. So I'm celebrating myself. I'm celebrating my friends. I'm celebrating. People should be celebrating certain things and not feel bad for doing so. Especially within a society that doesn't want to see us happy, that doesn't want to see us successful. We constantly have to uplift our brothers, sisters, family members, what have you. So that's kind of the mental health stance that I'm taking right now, especially within this NYC Pride work and centering Black voices, centering Black trans individuals. Yeah, constantly not feeling bad for taking time, like not being productive on a day and just sleeping and just having time to yourself is okay in this moment, because without that rest, we're not able to do the work. So that's my stance on it.
That's powerful. Thank you. That's exactly what I love. And I want to also hear from Nicole on this as well. I see you have some Ghanaian artifacts behind you. I don't know if you know, but CUNY BMI has helped start the Foundations of Birthright Africa, which is a program that we designed that's designed to help introduce Black and Brown students to their cultural roots and their legacy of innovation. So we spend time in Black historical sites in New York, Weeksville Heritage, out in Brooklyn, Central Park, which was formerly Seneca Village, where there was a full Black community, the Schomburg here across the street from where I live. And then we go to DC to the Howard Stacks. We go to the African American Museum, and then 10 days in Ghana. And so since doing this in 2017, it's been life-changing, and I've been using a lot of the historical facts about African contributions in every sector of the world that existed before. People in Europe were called the father of modern whatever, modern science, modern philosophy, modern writing. There's always someone in Africa who did it first. And so even just understanding that root and that privilege, what do you do to kind of keep yourself mentally, physically healthy in these moments, understanding who we are as a people?
Yeah. So, you hit the nail on the head. I am really stay grounded in my culture, and not only the culture as a Caribbean, but also my African culture. So, and I love Ghana. I did a study abroad program there, and I just fell in love with the place. So, but for me, Samantha really hit the nail on the head when she talked about celebrating life. It is really easy to get consumed and sad and depressed in this COVID and all the racial tensions that is happening, being quarantined at home. So trying to find your wins, trying to find your moments where you can celebrate yourself. And to what Samantha was saying, it's really, really saying to yourself that it is okay to not be okay. Every day does not have to be, sunshine and roses. Some days you just want to sit on the couch in your pajamas at 4 o'clock. And that is okay also. It is okay to take care of yourself first. It is not selfish to put you first. It is not selfish to make sure that your well-being, your mental, physical, spiritual well-being is secure, is grounded. And I know for me, that is really important. And it's something that I really try to tell our young people, because they're always looking, they have to take care of mom, my dad, and this person. I'm like, well, let's stop and see, what are you doing for you?
Yes.
What did you do? What did you do for you today? Did you take that walk? Did you use that special cologne that you love that makes you feel really good? Did you burn that candle? What is the little thing? And it doesn't have to be, outrageous, because a lot of people look to social media. You're on Twitter, you're at Instagram, and you see all these things that people are doing, and you're really consumed by it. And that is not reality. We know that. So one of the things I would also is to is okay to stay informed, and it's okay to be plugged in, but not to be consumed.
Yeah.
It is okay to put the phone down. It is okay to step away from CNN. It's good to have education, to ground yourself in knowledge of what is going on around you. Samantha touched on it again about voting power. Know your history, know who's in your community, know who's running for city council and for different things, but also take a moment to step back.
Yeah, that's awesome.
To breathe, to take some time for yourself, to shut things out, and sometimes to say no. I know, especially for women, saying no can be a thing, and it might be hard, but it's okay to say no also. And no without an explanation. That it's just no, not today. And that is okay, because preservation of mental health, preservation of spiritual health is super important. And in order for you to be good for tomorrow, you have to be great for today. And something that means making decisions that grow you, settle you, in order for you to be able to pivot for next day. So that's how I've learned to say no.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
that's been my strongest tool.
Well, that's great. Thank you for not saying no to being a part of this.
Oh, never to you, Sean. You always get yes.
That's so awesome. That's amazing. But yeah, that's so wise. I mean, there's so much wisdom in that, and that historical feeling that we have had, especially as Black and Brown people, that sometimes even in our workspaces where we are being demanded to actually step up, and sometimes it's almost like you have to prove your worth. So if you say no one time, you're afraid of being blackballed for the rest of your career. And so being able to have that empowerment to say, no, I'm saying no, it's healthy for me. And yet I still, move forward in the things that I'm moving toward. And so I appreciate that perspective for sure. Hollis, I want to kind of jump in with you and ask you just about also this idea of like self-care and what you do to stay healthy. I see you're outside, so it seems like you're getting some sun, which for me is a big source of self-care. And I want to just read this real quickly to you. So Bernice King, who was Coretta Scott and Martin Luther King's daughter, wrote this, and I reposted it today on Instagram, but wrote this paragraph, and I want to kind of read it and hear your reaction. When it gets down to having to use violence, then you are playing the system's game. The establishment will irritate you, pull your beard, flick your face, just to make you fight. Because once they've got you violent, then they know how to handle you. The only thing they don't know how to handle is nonviolence and humor, right? And so it was a really response to just how do we take care of ourselves and not react, but be proactive. And so when you think about mental health and self-care, what are proactive ideas that you employ, or even tips that you have for those who are in this era?
So I am so lucky because I have spent so much time working with musicians and music. So music and aesthetics of album art is a big part of my life. I also, every few months, I get on a plane and I go to another part of the world. I spend several months a year in different parts of the world talking to people and trying to figure out wisdom, especially from the old people that I sit and talk to. And with every problem or everything that I deal with, I always try to find an artistic, I create these artistic projects from it.
Yeah.
Or I surround myself with a village of wonderful people that we talk and we share information and intelligence with every day. I have a community. So one of the things that helped me out is building a village of community, travel. So for example, a year or so ago, I was in Cape Coast Castle in Ghana. And I told a guy, lock me in the cell. And he said, what? Yeah, I said, lock me in. He says, you can't stay in here long. So he locked me in. And I was riding all the way through Ghana for about a month. I came back and I said to someone, They said, how was the trip? I read a few pages from it, and it ended up being a play called A Walk into Slavery. And it was a catharsis for me, but also was a catharsis for all the people who visited the place. So for me, the challenge of the difficulties is always an opportunity for me to use it in some way to make art.
Mm,
Because when I was 16, I was protesting, I was angry, and we're still fighting the same things. So I use art as my weapon of the future.
mm, that's powerful. Would you mind me asking, Hollis, when you were 16, what year was
I can't tell you that.
that? Okay, I assume it was.
But learn that the issues that we're dealing with was exactly the same. And that anger, I caught myself being angry one day in a protest. I
Yeah.
didn't know who I was. I was disfigured. It was gonna kill me.
Mm,
And so when I went to art school, I tried to be this guy that will find a way to find a voice using that as my weapon.
mhm.
And whether it's an album cover or it's a play or it's a stage thing I'm designing, I'm using everything from, Adinkra symbols to everything to put into it to use my voice.
Yeah, yeah, that's powerful. Nikita, I want to hear your perspective on this too, because it strikes me that in some ways I'm actually a drummer. I actually play guitar as well, and so I'm in my home doing music to kind of help my own mental health state. But then also some ways too, I feel like I'm in between a generation that has used art as resistance and a generation that has used art plus um, wrecking the place, wrecking ish up and saying we're dismantling it today, right? And so I'm also just curious, like Nikita, with the activism that you do, what does it look like for you? How do you keep your mental health and physical health intact? If you do, maybe you're struggling.
Sure. Yeah. So in 2018, I read a book by Brittany Cooper, Eloquent Rage, which talked about Black women and feminism at the time, and looked at our history to try to help us with our present and our future. And that book really gave me a lot of the words of what I experienced, as Hollis referred to, so much anger, so much rage that is exhibited, maybe potentially at a protest, but also happens at my job. And Sam was there having the conversation with, at the time, my white executive director about the angry Black woman, and what that means and what that is, and deconstructing that myth. Um, and so I know for myself, coming from my faith, and where I am now, I try to live in moments of peace and prayer and meditation. And I will say that since COVID happened, there was a chance to slow down, which was for me most necessary, because similar to many others, there were lives lost, during COVID, whether it be from COVID or from other COVID related things. And so I really did need to take the time to find moments of just peace, of just nothing, and really, asking my current executive director, I need this time off. Like I can't do this work that you need me to do. I am not my best self to do this work that you need me to do right now. So advocating for yourself in that way, knowing that I think this pandemic, or this part of the pandemic, because we exist in multiple pandemics, the police brutality that is happening here is a pandemic, right? So for this public health crisis side of the pandemic, it really does give an opportunity to show that, like, hey, you might not need to be in the office every single day. And how you have summer Fridays, what are summer Mondays like, or something like that, or take a wellness Wednesdays, and so I think that there are, I hope, we come out of this, especially on the workforce side, of knowing that, like, wellness is important to productivity and creativity and accomplishing tasks. And so, I find that when I go through those moments of peace and prayer and meditation, I'm so much more clear and ready to like do the work that I'm being assigned to do. And I'll say also, for the experience that I'm living in now, because I'm not I do have anxiety, and so I'm not able to go out to the protest as I normally would. And so to be able to recognize that within myself, like literally have driven to a protest, I have my sign and I like can't get out the car because I'm just so anxious of what is going on with COVID. And so seeing that I want to do my work in social justice, what does that look like? How do I reshift that, right? So that comes down to more grounding work, more reading, what's going on. Who, we still haven't caught Breonna Taylor's killers. So, doing phone chains with my friends and making sure that we're calling the mayor, calling the DA, calling the police down there, taking that time to do that now, writing the letters, signing the petitions, the I Can't Breathe Act that just came out, doing the reading of finding out what that is and spreading that information out to our friends. So that's also work that can also be done. And I find that work to be a part of the healing and process for me as well.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I fully know that anxiety of going to a protest. And look, the first time I went to one and looked around at all these people, I was like, man, I am definitely getting COVID-19 if I walk out here. So, I mean, thankfully, the numbers have still been pretty relatively low in New York, but, we still have to be very cautious and very careful about, how we are engaging in this work. And I appreciate those health tips going forward. So this is the last question I'll give you all before I sort of open it up to the audience. And I want to ascribe it to anybody, whoever would like to answer first can answer. But in our world currently, I feel like we are writing and we're going to be writing, especially young people who are like under 30 years old, we're going to be writing the textbooks that are going to be in the classrooms for the next generation, right? I think it's clear the history of who people are hasn't been documented very well in current history textbooks in US history that exist in our schools. And so your life, in my opinion, Nikita, Sam, Nicole, Hollis, your lives are textbooks. Your lives are meant to be written, meant to be documented. And I've been saying to a lot of my friends, please document your thoughts, even if it's just, like starting a blog or just writing in a journal or something so that the next generation can hear what you've been thinking about, read what you've been pondering over and some of the challenges, so that we can have a guiding light for the next generation of learners about how we go about this. And I believe that while maybe the 1960s, 70s generation had like their one or two leaders who are always in the spotlight, this generation is going to have hundreds of leaders who are doing great work. And it's really important to take all the good parts of their leadership and also allow leaders to evolve to get better as leaders as well, because sometimes leaders make mistakes. So if you were thinking about your life as a textbook for the next generation, in what ways do you think you live now and that we should live going forward that would add value to the way that we tell our story for the next generation in those textbooks? So think about like 11th grade history in the year 2035. What would you want them to be reading about, and what of your life kind of speaks to what you would want them to be reading about, so they can learn the truth about who they are, especially Black and brown faces? How do they learn about their legacy of creation and innovation and their kingship, their queenship? How do they learn, and how do they use your life as a template for really engaging in that new learning?
I can go. We're like in this weird space where we're unlearning trauma, but also learning our history. So years from now, I would like to see what's happening now and what's current in those history books, but I also want to see the reason why we're doing this, because we don't learn our history, our Black history, for me, my queer history, Even with working with NYC Pride, I'm constantly learning about the Stonewall Uprising, about Marsha P. Johnson. I'm learning now. So when we talk about the future, we also have to insert the past, because the past was never inserted into our school books, for me and my public school books. So yeah, when I'm writing for the future, I want us to also touch on the past and how we got here and why we're doing this right now.
Yeah, that's real. So let me just ask you more specifically, even Samantha, as a follow-up, and I don't have any proposed solutions. I'm literally just asking this as a brainstorm. But like, given that education, right, is so important to our own understanding of who we are and our legacy before American version of Black history, when you learn these stories, in what ways do you think they should be told in the education system or in society, in the communities that we lived in? How should they be documented and sort of circulated and around our communities? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, for me, I grew up, my mother and my grandmother are both educators. They are also probably watching this. I think it starts from within, right? So like, what are we teaching our children? What are we teaching our grandchildren in that sense? I mean, personal opinion, we can't always rely on others to teach us our own history. So for me, it's really the way that is most effective in education is like starting off within the home. I mean, and also that being into play in like our history books and things like that. But I personally, I would start within the home, in teaching us what we need to know.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah. As we're also wrapping up this last question from me, I want to encourage the audience to submit their questions to Jorge Alguera, so you can actually put them in the chat or put them directly to him at Jorge, JORGE.ALGUERA @CUNY.edu, and we'll make sure that we pick a couple questions to answer, and we'll put his email address in the chat as well. Would anyone else like to pick up on that question? How do we write the new history and tell the new stories for this next generation?
I think that we are in a, to what Samantha was saying, that we're in a very unique time to be able to tell the truth. For the first time, to be able to speak with authenticity, with facts, with data about our history, to be the architects and the narrators of our own stories. Because for centuries, for so long, it was other people telling us about who we are. And we are finally in a generation, in a space that we could use multi-mediums, whether it's from social media to television, print, that we have that at our fingertips, that we can begin to unlearn and to relearn who we really are, that we didn't start from slavery, that, to your point, Sean, that we were god and goddesses before they decide to tell us who we were. And we have an opportune time in this moment to tell the story as it was supposed to be told. And I think that for me, what value it would add to the future textbook is, one, live your authentic self, whatever that is, that you have the ability, and you're in a space where you can just be who you are, and read and learn and take it upon yourselves to educate yourself. So sometimes you may be educating your family, because they have also been swimming in the white construct, and we all are in the space of learning and relearning. So and sometimes that it is sometimes not on you to teach everyone. Right? That it is okay to just, kind of not stay in your lane, but it's okay to learn for yourself. And that when we are when we are developing our textbook, that we can develop our textbook for us. So Sean, you mentioned earlier briefly that, it's always on the onus of us to educate everyone, all the masses. And that itself is re-traumatization.
Yeah.
right? I mean, we have being told to not only live our story, but retell our story and justify our story to others so that they come in and accept us. So one of the things that I will put in our textbook is to write your own story, to read, and that we are really pivotal, powerful time where we can tell our own narrative the way it's supposed to be told.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And I love the just the imagery, right, of the self-confidence that we can build into ourselves, and the idea of just like accumulating information and data to really change the narrative, because there's information out there. What I love about this era is that almost everything is being recorded now. So now, I think Will Smith might have said it early on in the COVID-19 crisis that racism isn't getting worse, it's just getting filmed. And I think that's a great, true statement about the era that we're in now. And so now we can document what we've seen, but then also now kind of start digging back into the history and exposing what has been true and what has not been true about our heritage and history before American slavery. So with Collis, I kind of want you to jump in and unmute yourself and just be able to share with us. You have this sort of artist lens and this lens from using art as activism, and I'm curious, even from that perspective, what stories do you think are being told from the work you get to do that will leave, what kind of impression do you think it will leave on the next generation? What is the next artist textbook going to look like in 20 years as a result of the work that you're able to be involved in?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think for me, we are in between time. We are between the time before and the time to come. And we have to make a choice with each other to embrace each other's humanity and take care of self. But above all, I wish I knew earlier the value of going to Africa. You have a 12-year-old, take them to Africa. America makes you small, I say. Africa makes you big. Take your children to Africa and let them get big. Let them see themselves in a world where it's larger than the one that's being told to them in school. Disrupt the history, disrupt the learning. Take them on the plane. Don't buy the sneakers. Take them somewhere and give them practical education. It will change the trajectory of their lives.
Yeah.
The way we are learning through the internet, the way information is flowing, there's no reason why we should stay within the lines that people have built for us. You know, let's change the idea of how we learn. You can get it on your phones, you can get it, you know, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. So I say for the next generation, I cannot imagine what's coming because we are in some brand new spaces. You know, I go to the protests and I hear these young people saying, shut shit down. If they don't change, shut the shit down. And I'm like, you know, I'm with it. I'm so with it, you know, and I'm excited and feel hopeful when I see people of different races showing up, you know, because we have made this mistake along the way thinking that we can solve this racism. White people have to solve this problem. They created it, they built the structures, and they need to get in and dismantle it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, shut ish down. I have to reframe it in my own CUNY BMI way. But
thank you. Thank you.
But it's all good. Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of traveling. When we took our students to Ghana the first time in 2017, we learned that there was, before Einstein, who was the father of modern science, there was Imhotep, who a few thousand years earlier was a father of science and responsible for the majority of the world's architectural and medical derivatives that exist today. Before Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, there was right? Thousands of years earlier, the first dentist recorded in history, the most major contribution. And before Socrates, who was in philosophy, there was Har-Jephthah, who was responsible for the philosophies that existed that came through Egypt, and so on and so forth. Even the image of the Mother Mary and the baby, all that stuff was stolen from African history and documented, even monuments and where hieroglyphics were telling the stories and pinned down. or should I say carved in. And so love that point. Love the idea of just knowing your history before by taking your students to different places. And I think you kind of answered Roseanne's question in a way too, Hollis.
Mm-hmm. Let me interject one more thing. Zena Abudawi on the BBC has done a video series called General History of Africa. If you get a chance, or if you can let your children sit and look at this, it will blow your mind.
Awesome. But can you spell that? We'll put that in the chat.
Zeniab, Zainab, and her last name is Badawi. And the program is called General History of Africa. It's a series from the BBC. It will blow your mind.
Awesome. Awesome. That's powerful. Nikita, I want to also give you a chance to answer this as well before we move into general questions. But please, what should textbooks look like? How do we tell these stories? How do we use your life and your life's work to now be a guiding post for that next Nikita Thompson in 30 years? Well, there's only one Nikita Thompson, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I think, and I hope, when I was in school at Temple, I actually went to school for education. I ended up not doing that. But I hope that the kids aren't necessarily reading out of a textbook. There are so many different mediums that students can learn from and are currently learning from, especially with this move to the online learning, which I'm sure Nicole will tell us has our plus and minuses. But the podcasts that are out there that are talking about these issues, Code Switch, The Read, the 1619 podcast from the New York Times is just phenomenal of how it completely destructs the history that most people around the world know about America and Black America, and completely obliterates what people know and sets the foundation to understand why we live how we live today, how racism is so systemic, so oppressive, and so pervasive throughout our lives, as well as people getting from the work that I do, that I learned from Pride and I take into other freelance projects that I do. Think about who is the most marginalized when you come to the table. Even though me as a Black woman, that sometimes that can be me in the room or me in the situation, but even still, there's someone who may be more marginalized than I am. Think about the privileges that I own, and make sure that I share my space. Do I need to sit at this table? Or should somebody be sitting in my stead because they know more about what is happening here? So I'm hoping that, as we said before, we get a chance to write our stories, and for what I do at Pride and in other projects that I do, that's really what I'm about, is producing projects and working with people that are telling authentic stories, and more so getting the logistics behind it so they can work on the creative. But yeah, centering who are the folks that don't get to speak about themselves, that don't get to see themselves, and make sure that they're seen.
Awesome, that's amazing. Love that. And I want to just kind of piggyback off of that idea of evolving education. We don't always have to learn from a physical textbook anymore. We have access to resources. I mean, during this quarantine, I've taught myself, I should have another degree, because I've taught myself so many different things from going on YouTube. I call YouTube University because I feel like I'm on there all the time learning how to sew. I've learned how to cook. I've learned all these different things in the last 4 months that I never thought I would learn. And so with that being said, I want to kind of just piggyback. I think Hollis kind of already answered from one of the questions from Roseanne about what should young people do, a 12-year-old, a young person who is under a preteen, what can we do to really encourage their learning? They might not be able to, digest the 1619 podcast. They might not be able to digest some of the deeper stuff. I know that with my nephews and nieces, we started doing a book club every 2 weeks. We go through a couple chapters of the autobiography of Malcolm X. And it's been a really powerful time of us just sharing stories, and they're starting to open up about things that they've experienced in terms of discrimination, or even I have one nephew who just thinks that discrimination it's fake because he's actually like a star athlete. He's really great at running and basketball. And he's like, everybody treats me great. I don't understand what this discrimination is all about. And so he has no idea yet, but he's going to be learning very soon. And so, you know, as even, what do we do for these young people, really young people, not just the BMI type students, but also just like preteens and teenagers? What sorts of evolved educational pieces would you encourage a young child to get him to engage in, so their life is set up to be full of a clarity about their value, their worth, and have a system of equity that's already set up in their mind? So yeah, I'll open that up, and whoever wants to jump in on that.
I can answer. I know from my experience growing up and to where I am now, service and doing acts of service was a really great entry point. Also understanding and owning that everyone, it doesn't matter how old you are, your sex, gender, who everyone has their own specific point of entry. And for some people that could be, you know, a moment where they were profiled and stopped by the cops. For another, it could be the way that they were treated in a grocery store. Something typically happens. It could be seeing these images of police brutality. Something typically happens to someone that, you know, does something in their mind that switches on, like, I need to know more. And next thing you know, you'll see someone listening to more podcasts, reading more books, and all of that is healthy. And so encourage that. But I definitely think for younger kids, doing acts of service, you know, going to a food pantry and seeing a line where you may see, I know when I did food pantry services when I was younger, I would be doing the services, but I would see people in the line that were my age and looked like me, and they still, you know, they didn't have you know, the resources that they needed. And that stuck with me so much that now I serve on the junior board for the New York Common Pantry, which serves you know, homeless meals, food to the homeless, and also just families that are constantly, you know, basically one paycheck away from you know, living in food deserts. You know, it turned that into advocacy for SNAP programs and philanthropy in that space. So I think doing those acts of service at a young age will be very helpful to kids and help form a point of entry for them.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I have forgotten until I was an adult how impactful service as a kid was for me. My dad was a minister, and so we had a soup kitchen that we had gone to every Saturday, and we had like we called a Hope House for those who might have needed some housing assistance that we would help support also on a regular basis. And also we would also visit the local prisons and spend time with, like, you know, doing like ministry services and stuff. But I didn't realize how it impacted my childhood until, like, I told people as in my 20s, and then they were like, oh, that makes so much sense. That's why you care about people, you know? And I was like, oh yeah, I never really connected it to that. But doing that at such a young age can really impact your future. And I love that. That's a great suggestion. So thank you for that. I want to ask another question from the audience as well. And then we're going to kind of wrap up here in the next few minutes. But a great question from Archie Richards here at City Tech. He's also on the Zoom call. So he says that besides recording and speaking through our voice or reframing our history, so besides recording and speaking through our voice or reframing our history, what lessons from economics and legislation and their impacts on change can we pass on, right? So besides recording and speaking through our voice on reframing history, what lessons from economics and legislation and their impacts on change can we pass on, right? And so my first reaction to this question is I'm thinking about how July 7th was widely publicized on social media as like Blackout Tuesday, right? And then also even on July 4th, where people were encouraged to spend their money in Black-owned communities, and how, and I even mentioned this last month, how In Jewish communities and white communities, the dollar can be circulated 6 or 7 times before it ever goes outside of their communities. But in Black and brown communities, especially because of how the zoning has been set up and the way ownership works in our communities, the dollar may only circulate a half a time or 0.1 times before it actually even goes outside of its community. So when you're thinking about just how, what are the impacts that we can pass on? What lessons can we pass on as far as economics and legislation that can move us forward? And maybe I'll start with, I'm actually going to start with Nicole. I'm going to ask you specifically, even if you just bring it down to a personal level, right? Economically, legislatively, what sorts of things are you supporting? How are you spending your money? How are you deciding who you vote for, who you back up? What does that process look like for you in reframing our history and telling new stories?
Sure. So I think to, just to go back a little bit to his question around the impacts and change that we can pass on, I think with anything, for me personally, anytime I'm trying to learn about something now, I go back to the past so we can learn from. So I would say, let's look at how we came about with the 15th Amendment for Black men to vote. How did Ida B. Wells do it? Like, let's look to the folks who've already paved the way for us. Let's look at how Martin and Malcolm did it. Let's look towards those, because we have prime examples in our own rich, amazing history that have led the way for us. So I would say first, I always start from a historical context, right? I believe in Sankofa. We have to know where we were in order to know where we're going. So for me, I always start from our history and then use that as my blueprint to learn about anything else moving forward. And even in terms of like with the economics, I think as I'm becoming more aware, more educated, I really look to support the mom and pop stores, Black owned businesses. You mentioned about how money circulates in our community and ensuring that I am starting there, and also to not doing it just because it's a trend, but really making it be a part of my daily process, and also giving room for grace and for mistakes, because I find that we have a tendency that if we go to a Black owned restaurant or a Black owned business and we have one bad experience, then it's like, well, this is why I'm not supporting Black owned, because X, Y, Z, right? So we're giving humanity and grace for folks who are trying to do startups and trying to start from the ground up, and allowing them the same kind of room for error as we do when we go to other businesses and we continue going to other businesses. So I think that's really important in making sure that we are spending our dollars within our community with people who look like us, who are really trying and striving to set their own path, and how we can begin to encourage that. Also, from a student point of view, one of the things that's really important, and I continue to push with like colleagues who are talking to me about it, is financial literacy. So I'm starting a summer institute, and it's called Summer Institute for Emerging Leaders for Social Justice. And it's a 4-week institute for young men of color. And one of the things that we've definitely ingrained in there is financial literacy, but financial literacy from a culturally responsive perspective. Not just spending money, but why are you spending money? Who are you spending money with? And then talk about really building wealth, understanding really taxes and everything that goes with financial literacy, just really grounding our brothers in understanding the power of the dollar, and more importantly, the power of their dollar.
Yes.
Because we as people, we contribute to the infrastructure, and we contribute to the movement of America. So where are our dollars going, and making sure that our dollar is respected, it is valued, and it is noted.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I love that idea too, especially because last month when we were talking a little bit about economic empowerment, we talked about when you support Black owned businesses, sometimes that means they might be startups or not as old as established like chain restaurants. So that means you might have to give a little bit more grace. You You might have to give some more feedback to that business so they can get better, but don't give up on it because you had one bad experience, right? And that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind as we're even circulating our money, is that it also comes with this era of, hey, we have a lot of new businesses that are now established, and industries that have a lot of established old businesses that people know their name, they have name recognition, they have been around for a long time. Just being aware of that in general. So great response. Thanks so much. I want to ask one last question and we're going to wrap it up.
Can I actually jump in before we move on to the next question?
Yeah.
I wanted to jump in terms of legislation. A lot of times we have these conversations about why, well, we say go vote, it's important to vote. We say participate in the census, it's important to do so. But we leave out the conversation of why, like what rights were taken away from us last year, what rights were taken away from us 2 years ago. Those conversations about the why are super important to the Gen Z, the millennials. So Nicole, to your point, like going back to historical knowledge, like those are the things that we want to pass on in terms of economics and also just legislation, because participating in the census ultimately determines where dollars go within the community. So like having those conversations of like the actual why are super important to pass on.
I also wanted to kind of jump in to talk about strategy. I think sometimes we wait for, oh, well, what is Color of Change doing or NAACP doing? And, oh, that's when we're going to do, you know, our boycott or things like that. And it doesn't have to be that deep. You know, you can work with your group of friends, work with your family, you know, 10, 15 people and say, you know, on this Tuesday, on this Wednesday, for this week, we are going to buy Black only. And understand that you can't just see that on a post and then the next day just do it. You have to actually prepare because, you know, in order to buy Black, and because we don't have enough, because it's not immediately at our fingertips. So I think that, you know, folks can, I do a lot of things with my friends, and we'll see something online and be like, it's tomorrow, we're not ready yet. And like, we won't use that as a deterrent. We'll just try to get other people together to do it when we know that like we have the time, and that information spreads because then another group does that as well. I also think that, you know, Nipsey Hussle talked about buying the block and being there, you know, thinking about entrepreneurialism and what are the communities that used to be ours, and how can we strategize on either getting them back, or what are the communities that we are currently moving into? What are the housing trends where we see other people trying to profit off of the Black dollar? Why not be strategic and go to those communities and set up your business there and become a part of, you know, the business councils and homeowners associations over there to make a difference and make sure that that like Black voices are being heard. So sometimes that doesn't need to happen on this really, really big scale. It can happen amongst friends, amongst families, and really just spread and snowball from there.
Yes, absolutely. So this group that you started with your friends, like these are just people that you're in a group chat with. Did you start a group, or is it just like friends that you know personally?
It's really just friends that I know personally. We basically all lived together at some point in time in college. But once we come up with something, we can we'll like get some graphics on it and make it make sense, and then we'll send it out to our friends and our family. And you know, even as I said before, like thinking about different points of entry, you know, coming from an immigrant background, there as you know, Nicole also broke down that there are a lot of things that happen. You know, I'm from Jamaica, from the islands, that it's different when you come here. So there's a lot of unlearning that has to take place. So thinking back to points of entry, you know, just providing that information for people about what the truth is of what's happening within Black America, and how it's different, and why you need to, as Sam said, vote, why you need to do the census. I know coming from an immigrant background, like census, getting counted, no, like, but that's not true. Like, you know, you do need to go out and do the census. The, you know, that issue that was happening before of the Trump administration trying to, you know, put down certain questions to get to the identity of your immigration status, those questions are no longer on there. So making sure that people are informed about that so they won't shy away from doing the census is really, really important. So, and that work, you know, can happen on a smaller level. It doesn't have to be this big campaign that we see a lot of other folks do.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's powerful. Well, good stuff. That's good information right there. And I see a lot of people are quoting in the chat parts of what you are saying. So it's really great to, hopefully we can keep this sort of as a template and some notes that we can share with our greater community as well. There's one more question I want to address before we kind of wrap up. And this one is specifically for Nicole. And so, Nicole, someone asked in the YouTube audience, I believe. It's from Dexter Brathwaite. And it says, what can be done through the equity program, I think the program that you run, that's involved with the DOE, to have curriculum reflects the needs and the growth of Black children in New York City, that New York City serves. So what can be done in the DOE through your program, through equity, and to be able to have the curriculum reflect the needs and also, I guess, cultivate the growth of Black children that New York City serves?
So I'm gonna, you know, so I work for the Office of Equity and Access, and we have a number of initiatives. One of the initiatives that is really on the forefront is AP for All. And the AP for All right now, they have, and I would encourage everyone to go to change.org/AP Black History. And they're really changing the trajectory for AP and the nation. So they are now advocating that there is a Black History advanced placement course in all schools in New York City. And they've been doing change.org, and they have over 23,000 signatures that they're petitioning College Board to add that to the curriculum. Which is powerful. So this is not only in New York City. So what they're doing is nationwide to really change the spectrum of what education looks like. So that is one thing that I would encourage everyone. I'll put the link in. Please go and sign the petition. It's change.org/AP Black History. And they're doing amazing work. Me personally, with the institute that we're doing, is always, you know, again, I'm a little history buff. So our work is really grounded in identity development, cultural responsive education, and history. So we really want to be able to ground our young men and have them have a firm foundation of who they are, where they really came from. A sense, so they could gain a sense of empowerment and a sense of engagement. And I'm hoping that, yes, thank you very much, Sean. That's exactly it. So I'm hoping, so we're, you know, with the goal of being able to move this institute from just a summer program to extend it beyond. But also, you know, besides the AP for All work and the work that I am doing, we have our implicit bias work that is working with teachers and educators around New York City to address and bring awareness to their implicit bias. So when they're in the classrooms and they're writing curriculums and making policies, that they understand and be able to come through and do all of this through an equity lens. So there's work that is actively happening, and we are and you know, people aren't sleeping. We are really, really trying hard to undo a system, right? To put a dent in a system that has been upheld and reinforced for centuries. But the work is there. People are really working hard for our students, because we know, I think in this time more than ever, it is critical. I would even say it's life or death.
Yeah.
Right? That we be able to ensure that there's that the education system is reflective of the 1.1 million students that they serve. We're knowing that over 70% of those 1.1 million students are students of color.
Wow, powerful. Thank you. Thank you for that great resource, that great website as well. I'll sign a petition today.
Please, thank you.
Absolutely. So I do want to kind of just wrap it up here. It's almost 1:30 and we try to keep these around 90 minutes. But I do appreciate you all just taking the time to be transparent about your work, even your story, your history, your backdrop to doing the work that you're doing. And it's important to me that through these conversations that there continues to be more of a network that's larger in New York City that we can benefit from and use to sort of encourage each other. So, you know, there's one thing that, a statement that I've always heard that I think means more to me now than ever, but it's that like sometimes you don't always remember what people know, but so you all have this great information, but you do remember how people made you feel, right? So you may not always remember what people said to you or how smart they were, but you know how they make you feel. And a lot of times, unless you have conversations, you don't know, you know, how or where or how or when to support someone, or in what ways that we can be just even more connected. So just even having this human connection with you makes it feel like I'm appreciative of it for myself, but also for the CUNY BMI network that has now seen you, will see this video and say, oh yeah, I know that this work exists, that Nikita's doing, that Nicole's doing, that Samantha's doing, that Hollis is doing. So thank you for making yourself available. And for those who are part of this conversation on YouTube, Facebook, and been a part of the Zoom conversation and really getting involved in the chat space, thank you for that. We're gonna save these notes, share those resources, and send a little thank you out to those who are involved today. And so I'll kind of wrap it up and just saying, if there's any last comments or words that you have been able to say, Hollis or Samantha or Nikita, Nicole, if anything you want to add, grateful to give you a space for that. Any sort of events that you want to remind us of and plugs that you have, shameless plugs, it can be whatever, please do that now, and then we'll kind of say goodbye for today.
I mean, for me, I just want to continuously reiterate, Black joy is an act of resistance. So celebrate yourself, celebrate those grades, celebrate graduating, celebrate the small wins within this space to get you motivated about the next thing that you're going to do. So that's it.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Great, so much. Thank you all. I appreciate it. And we'll be looking to follow you, Samantha, with your cultural crawl, especially when outside opens up again. We're going to be, Nicole, looking to sign a petition. Hollis, we're going to be looking to support artists in any way possible going forward and the work that you get to do. I know you probably miss traveling internationally, but you know, you got to stay put for a little while, man. So, you know, get used to it. And Nikita, we certainly look forward to supporting the events you have coming up as well. So thank you, I appreciate it. And I'll send you a little thank you note. And for all who are part, just remember, I am BMI. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, at CUNY BMI, CUNY BMI. And just realize that we are here again on August 13th with another town hall with another list of amazing guest speakers from New York City who are doing some great work. So thank you all. Take care. Have a great day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
See you. Take care.